Is Yonge Street the longest street in the world? It held that status according to the Guinness Book of World Records until 1999, when it was replaced by the Pan American Highway. For this claim to be true, Yonge Street would have to be considered part of Highway 11, and at one time, Yonge Street was a part of the Ontario provincial highway system, so you could make that argument. However, during the 90s, the province transferred responsibility for Yonge Street onto the cities by removing it from the highway system. So today, Yonge Street ends in Holland Marsh, just north of the Queensville Side Road. Officially, there's also an unconnected section further north around Keswick, but we're not counting that. This episode is about Yonge Street, the longest road in the hearts of Torontonians. I'm Adam Weiser.
And I'm Grayson Miller, and this is Muddy York.
The initiative to create Yonge Street came from John Graves Simcoe. After founding the town of York in 1793, Simcoe wanted to develop a land route from Lake Ontario to Lake Huron via Lake Simcoe and Georgian Bay. This road would be useful for traders, but Simcoe was a soldier, and he was primarily interested in creating a route that soldiers could use in the event of war with the United States. That autumn, Simcoe embarked on a trek to review a pre-existing trade route called the Toronto Carrying Place Route, which ran up the Humber River and over the Oak Ridges Moraine before reaching the western branch of the Holland River, which flowed into Lake Simcoe. Incidentally, this would be when Lake Simcoe got its name. Lake Simcoe is actually not named after John Graves Simcoe. It's actually named after his father, who just coincidentally happened to have the same name. Funny that. Simcoe was not impressed with the Toronto Carrying Place route. Holland Marsh would be difficult for soldiers to cross, and he described the Holland River as a mere ditch, swimming with bullfrogs and water snakes. We don't know what he had against bullfrogs. The story goes that Simcoe met an Ojibwe who told him about another route leading south from the eastern branch of the Holland River by which the swamps could be avoided. This trail had obviously been in use before the British arrived, but unlike other paths, we don't have a name for this route and it doesn't appear on any maps, so it probably wasn't that important. Simcoe would use this route for his return trip to York, and he chose it as the basis for the new road, which he named after Sir George Yonge, the British Secretary of War and Simcoe's friend. Yonge was also an expert on Roman roads, so naming a street after him is somewhat appropriate.
In early 1794, a surveyor named Augustus Jones was tasked with laying out the route for the new street. Two surveyors with compasses would follow Jones, notching trees to indicate the boundary of the street and followed by woodmen chopping down the trees in the course of the roadway. This was followed by a second survey in which authorities began laying out property lots on either side of the road. The lots were numbered starting with 1, the present site of Eglinton, and ending with 133 at the mouth of the Holland River. By the end of May, the Queen's Rangers had opened Yonge Street from Eglinton to Lot 17, about a quarter mile north of Sheppard. Opening a road meant that a path of 20 feet wide had been cleared through the woods. However, a war scare with the United States meant that the Rangers would be pulled from the project and redeployed to guard the frontier. In the absence of another labor force to work on Yonge Street, Simcoe cut a deal with a man named William Bursey. Now, Bursey will get his own episode at some point, but for now, he was leading a group of German settlers looking for land. Simcoe offered them with property in Markham, but Bursey was a schemer, and he made another deal with Simcoe by which his settlers would complete a usable wagon road from York to Holland Landing within 1 year in exchange for 4 lots of prime property along Yonge Street. He made good progress in improving the southern part of the road. However, he would only get as far north as Langstaff and Richmond Hill. Some of this was his fault. He underestimated the difficulties of clearing roads during a Canadian winter, and he got distracted by a scheme to build a canal between the Humber and Holland rivers. Some of it was the government's fault. The The Markham lands wouldn't be surveyed until fall, which meant that his settlers didn't have enough food or shelter for winter. Bercy never got his Yonge Street property. By this time, tensions had eased between the British and American governments, and the Queen's Rangers were able to resume working on Yonge Street. They did this work, chopping down trees and clearing brush in the middle of winter from December of 1795 to February of 1796. Remember that the next time you complain about shuffling your driveway. On February 27, Simcoe wrote to the Duke of Portland that the roads from York to the headwaters of Lake Huron has been opened by the soldiers.
As work on Yonge Street progressed, settlers began pouring into the area. The first official resident along Yonge Street was Asa Johnson, who settled on Lot 29 in Vaughan in 1794. Preference was given to United Empire Loyalists, their children, and former military personnel who got dibs on the best property. However, these groups were accompanied by a host of what were called late Loyalists, Americans who came north in search of cheap land. Some of the notable early settlers were William Cooper, who founded the first coffee house in Toronto, Richard Lippincott, a Loyalist soldier who George Washington had repeatedly tried to kill, and Henry Alcock, who briefly served as the first elected representative from Toronto. Listen to the very first episode of Muddy York if you'd like to learn more. One of the requirements for settlers was that they do open as much of the Yonge Street Road as lies between the front of their lots and the middle of said road. Men were also supposed to provide up to 12 days of free labor for road work each year. However, getting people to actually do this labor could be a challenge. Clearing tree stumps was especially hard, and a Stump Act passed in 1800 allowed people who were publicly intoxicated to be sentenced to remove a certain number of stumps. This task was so arduous that it noticeably reduced the level of public drunkenness.
At this time, Yonge Street was often just a twisting pathway through the woods. A settler named Cornelius Van Noordstrom described it this way: "The road is yet very bad. There are pools of water among the roots of trees and fallen logs in swampy spots, and these pools, being half frozen, render them still more disagreeable when the horses plunge into them." One of the biggest problems with traveling along Yonge Street was the many hills and valleys that had to be crossed. 200 years of landscaping and infrastructure means that we don't really notice these challenges today. But crossing Rosedale Ravine north of Bloor, Summerhill south of St. Clair, and especially Hogs Hollow at York Mills would be a major challenge for a farmer trying to bring his produce to market. There were also a host of creeks and streams that had to be crossed, like Tattle Creek north of Queen, Castle Frank Brook near Rosedale, and even the West Don River near York Mills. The Don is the only one of these waterways that still runs above ground. The rest have all been buried.
A major push to improve Yonge Street came during the War of 1812. After the American victory in the Battle of Lake Erie, the only way to move troops to the upper Great Lakes was by land, and the British government hurriedly ordered the army to build a road extension from Lake Simcoe to Penetanguishene on Georgian Bay. This had been Simcoe's original plan, and it marked the beginning of Highway 11. The task of hacking a 30-mile route through the wilderness began in December 1814, just weeks before the war ended. Tradition has it that a military convoy bringing supplies to Penetanguishene learned about the piece en route. The heaviest item in their convoy was an anchor for a warship being built on Georgian Bay. But the ship was never finished, and the anchor was left in Holland Landing, where it can still be found.
During the 1820s, stagecoaches began operating along Yonge Street. In 1825, the Upper Canada Gazette and the Weekly Register advertised that Lewis Bapp had begun to operate a twice-weekly service from York to Holland Landing. An ad from 1829 promised to make the trip from York to Newmarket in just 9 hours. So long. And by 1833, stagecoaches were making daily trips north and south along Yonge Street. It was not a pleasant journey. The carriages were suspended by leather straps, which meant that passengers felt every bump and hole in the road. The coaches ran much smoother in winter when the wheels could be replaced with sleigh runners. When necessary, passengers would also be expected to help a coach get its destination by pulling it up hills, digging it out of potholes, or removing fallen trees from the road. Talk about having to do full service. Stagecoaches also had to respect the rules of the road. A statute was passed requiring vehicles to drive on the right side of the road and to have at least 2 bells attached to the harness to warn oncoming traffic. 5 years later, Upper Canada got its first speeding and parking rules when it became illegal to leave a wagon on the street for more than 24 hours or to drive at an unreasonable speed. Taverns were the other big industry along Yonge Street, and stagecoaches would make regular stops to change horses, deliver mail, and get something to eat. Bear in mind that a Yonge Street tavern was more than just a pub. It was a bar, a restaurant, a post office, a motel, and a community center. Often, it would be the only public building in a small community. Some of the better-known taverns were the Red Lion Inn at Bloor, which we covered in our episode about Yorkville, the Golden Lion Hotel at Shepherd, Montgomery's Tavern at Eglinton, and the Miller's Tavern, which is around York Mills, which, before its new owners, was a place frequented by my friends and I, way back in the day, probably not legally, but this is before the new owners, obviously, way back in the day.
Gray's a lot older than he looks.
Yeah, I mean, not early 1900s, but yeah, we're talking about late 90s here, early 2000s. Anyways, Montgomery's Tavern became so famous because it was the meeting place for William Lyon Mackenzie's rebels in 1837, as well as the site of the battle that quickly ended his rebellion.
Over the years, government efforts to spend on road improvements had been stymied by the legislature, partly due to short-sighted stinginess and partly because these improvements were very expensive. The government decided that the solution was turnpiking, meaning tolls. The first toll booth would be set up at Bloor Street. In 1830, the toll was half a penny for each pig, sheep, or goat, 1 penny for oxen and cows, and 2 pence for any vehicle pulled by a horse. Some of these tolls were collected by the city, while others were collected by private companies that assumed responsibility for road maintenance in exchange for the right to collect a toll. The government used this revenue to macadamize Yonge Street. This technique was developed by a Scot named John Loudon McAdam. Now, like all people named Adam, he was brilliant beyond measure. And he developed a new method of road construction, which used smaller pieces of stone on a deeper foundation. Macadamized roads were vastly easier to travel on, but they were also expensive. A 1-mile test strip on Yonge Street cost 3 times more than expected and bankrupted the contractor. Instead, private companies preferred to build corduroy roads, which consisted of square logs laid perpendicular to the course of traffic. This was much cheaper than macadamizing, but corduroy roads usually fell apart within 5 years, and most of the companies didn't earn enough toll revenue to pay for maintenance. This left the government responsible for any additional costs, and let this be a lesson that private management of roads doesn't work. As a result, the provincial government established the Board of Works to assume responsibility for building and maintaining roads. However, within 4 years, it had exhausted all of the money allocated for Yonge Street, and construction and maintenance were ground to a halt. So, let this be a lesson that public management of roads doesn't work.
In 1841, Yonge Street would be lit for the first time at night when Toronto introduced a dozen gas lampposts. If you think about all the lights along the Yonge Street strip today, from restaurants to theaters to billboards, all of it started with those 12 lonely lamps. In 1849, the first buses arrived on Yonge Street. A cabinet maker named Bert Williams built 4 horse-drawn omnibuses and began operating a regular service transporting people between St. Lawrence Market and the Red Lion Inn on Yonge Street just north of Bloor. The trip cost 6 pence and took around 10 minutes, which would still be a respectable time today. However, In 1861, the Toronto Street Railway Company won the franchise to operate horse-drawn streetcars in Toronto. They brought out Williams and laid tracks to copy his route. Returning to 1849, this was the year that a group of corrupt politicians and businessmen stole Yonge Street. Does that sound odd? Well, let's break it down. Here's what happened. Inspector General Francis Hincks announced that all of York's toll roads, including Yonge Street, Dundas, Kingston Road, and Lakeshore, would be sold at the municipalities would have the first opportunity to purchase them. In 1850, he posted one small ad announcing the sale. Nobody noticed it. So, in August, he announced that all of the roads had been sold to a private company led by James Beatty, his friend and campaign contributor. In the face of public outrage, Hincks agreed to hold an auction for the roads despite his earlier promise about giving preference to municipalities. After the city had submitted a bid of £75,000, Hincks arranged for Beatty to bid £75,100 and became the proud owner of Yonge Street and the first player of The Price is Right.
The good news is that the scheme would badly backfire. In 1853, the Ontario-Simcoe-Huron Railway opened, running parallel to Yonge Street. The value of the tolls along Yonge Street plummeted, and Beatty fell behind on his payments, so the government took control of the roads. On April 4th, 1867, just a few months before Confederation, Yonge and Peel counties were allowed to purchase the roads for $72,500, which is substantially less than it would have cost in 1850. So, all's well that ends well, one hopes. And this is a good place to leave off for today. In our next episode, we'll talk about how Yonge Street became Toronto's main shopping street, how streetcars and urban development moved north, and how the Yonge Street strip was left to decay before a massive new shopping mall would help to kickstart a recovery. But before we leave off for today, Gray has a correction to make for one of our previous episodes.
And we'll have to edit that out because I messaged my friend and he hasn't gotten back to me and I couldn't remember what exactly the correction was. So we will put that in later.
I actually like it. You're not going to leave it in, but you said that so smoothly that I almost feel like you should.
All right. So, I mean, by friend, I mean listener. All right, guys. Well, that's it for this part today. Make sure that you tune in and keep following the story because it's going to be great. Okay, Adam. Guys, if they want to reach out to us, as they should, where should they find us?
Well, if you're going to email us, if you're feeling old-fashioned, it's muddy_york@outlook.com. On Twitter, or whatever Elon's calling it now, it's muddy_york. On Blue Sky, it's Muddy York, all one word. And on Facebook, it's Muddy York History, again, all one word. We'd love to hear from you. And we will see you in 2 weeks where we'll finish off this story.
Goodbye.